Oh, hi there. Oh my gosh, it's been a while since I've been here. Hi everyone, Jaymes Mansfield here bringing you yet another video. And today I'm bringing you yet another episode of Iconic Brunettes. Yes. Oh my gosh, now things may look a little bit different. I've given this room a makeover, and I have to say it's looking rather chic and glamorous. Now, a lot has changed since I last was here. I've recently been announced for All Stars, yes. I'm so excited. This is our first video back ever since the announcement. So here we go. Iconic Brunettes is back in form, honey. Now, our iconic brunette this week is none other than the glamorous, the sexy, the super bitch, Joan Collins. Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to talk about Joan Collins for Iconic Brunettes. I've been wanting to talk about her for a while because she's honestly had sort of a resurgence on TikTok recently where people are doing little skits from Dynasty as her as Alexis, and you know, her speech with Dominique with the burn champagne. Like, it's all making a resurgence. So I'm excited to talk about Joan Collins and give some context for you youngsters out there who don't quite know, who is this bitchy British woman? Well, let's get started. First things first, I'm using the Book Smart Brown from Jaymes Mansfield Beauty to do this. Joan Collins had beautiful, like, dark brunette hair, like a deep brown, sometimes black, but usually like a deep brown. It's usually a little lighter than dark black, you know? So we are gonna get started and do her classic Alexis Carrington hair. Now, first things first, we have to put a curl pattern in this. So I'm going to start by basically rolling down the hair. Now, to give context to who Joan Collins was, she got her start in England. She comes from a showbiz family. Her father was a showbiz agent, and her aunt actually was in show business as a performer in England. So she had a good start as far as like getting prepped for performance. Now, as a teenager, she wanted to become an actress, which really, you know, her father did not like this because he worked in show business. He worked with chorus girls and actresses, and he knew exactly how the men in the industry could be, and he wanted to shield her from that as much as possible. But Joan was undeterred. She wanted to be an actress, and she was going to be one. Initially, she did not want to be a film actress. Films are something she'd kind of fallen into. She was actually going to a very prestigious school, like in England, for acting. Like, they're teaching her elocution and basically prepping her to be a woman of the formal stage. Now, it wasn't until she was approaching like 17 years old that she was asked to do a film. And at first she had no interest in it. She thought it was kind of trashy and kind of like low grade compared to the theater. That was kind of the attitude back then. Like, the theater was really high up on a pedestal, whereas like being in films was seen as sort of like, you know, a very low bar as far as acting goes. As her teacher would put it, it's all looks and no technique. Well, Joan Collins felt this way until she saw the salary they were willing to pay her for this, and she thought, you know what? I think I can do films after all. Money is a great way to convince somebody. She saw the amount they're willing to pay her to do a little bit of film acting, and she fell into it. And from there, her agent had told her, like, look, you're gonna have to leave this drama school because things are just happening too quickly for you. She had fallen into a type. In England, she had fallen into the juvenile delinquent type for films. She was essentially the brunette bad girl, you know, the brunette Diana Dors type. She was fast, she was loose, and she was a tough girl. And she would do a bunch of films like this in the 1950s. Very early 1950s. And it eventually gave her her start and gave her, like, you know, the platform she needed to be discovered and transcend to her next phase in her career, because Joan Collins came in waves, all right? And when she came, she made a splash. Now, this would parlay her into doing sword and sandals pictures, and none other than the great Howard Hawks wanted her. So he specifically wanted Joan Collins. He had seen her face and thought, this girl is beautiful. So they basically brought her up and took her all the way over there to film this gorgeous sword and sandals picture, which would begin the next phase in her career. Joan Collins, the golden age actress. Now, Joan Collins was one of the last vestiges of like the classic golden age era of movie stars. Like, you think like Marilyn Monroe, Jane Mansfield, Sophia Loren, like that caliber of like the mid 1950s all the way to the early 1960s. That gap of, you know, it's just classic Hollywood golden age starlets. Joan Collins was lumped into there. Now, 20th Century Fox was interested in her because they had Elizabeth Taylor. and they needed somebody to temper her. Because sort of like what they do with Jane Mansfield and Marilyn Monroe, this is always like the narrative they try and spin, right? where like they try and bring someone that's just like this major actress so that they can keep them tempered, when really it was just so that they can make more money. If Elizabeth Taylor was busy, they could use Joan Collins. If Marilyn Monroe was busy, they used Jayme Mansfield. Like, it makes sense. You have types and you're constantly keeping this machine going. That's really what it was. And Joan Collins was no different from Jayme Mansfield, where they brought her in as an Elizabeth Taylor type. This prim, proper, gorgeous British girl, beautiful face, beautiful body, and bring her in to do these stuffy English type roles, or, you know, these gorgeous, gorgeous girl roles. Joan Collins was no fool. What you will learn about her is she was a very, very savvy businesswoman. They initially only wanted to pay her a very small, meager salary, and she had convinced them to jump her salary up from $500 to $1,500, which was a great salary back then. She wasn't going to be taken advantage of. Like, she knew how show business worked from, you know, having the father that she had. So she was preparing herself to basically get comfortable. However, there were some pitfalls that she would fallen into. She had a tendency to not choose the greatest men. And her first husband, whose name I will leave out because he's not worth talking about, took advantage of Joan Collins in a way that like really messed her up for a long time. It really put a lot of like distrust in men for her. You can dig deeper into how this relationship went about and how it came about. I don't really want to talk about it because I will get demonetized, but it was messy. And he took her for a spin and would continue to torment her throughout her life, especially during this part of her career, when she was becoming a big star in 20th Century Fox films. She had done movies like The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing, The Virgin Queen with Bette Davis, who she said would terrified her. She said Bette Davis had a tendency to like not like younger actresses and would snap if anything goes wrong. Like, she recalls one point where Bette Davis snapped at her like,
"Don't they teach you anything in those stuffy English schools?"
Now, I'm going to roll the rest of this and we'll start the next phase of Joan Collins' career, because the way her career ended at 20th Century Fox is very interesting, and the period of 1960s is very, very fascinating as to how she became a star yet again. Like I said, Joan Collins comes in waves, but we'll get back to it. I'm gonna curl this and I'll be right back. All right, I am back. Now, pay no attention to my chest. I had a pimple on my chest and I did pop it during the break, so I'm addressing it because this channel is all about honesty. So yeah, I had a chest pimple and I popped it. I might put a stone there or something. I debated like putting a rhinestone on top of it. Maybe in the next break, we'll see. Anyways, the hair is all curled, so let's get started. So let me start taking stuff down. Yes, gorgeous. Oh my goodness. We are doing Alexis Carrington hair today. You know, Joan Collins' most iconic role. But it was a long, long journey to get to this role, okay? Now, when she was at the film studios in Hollywood, let's just say her career wasn't necessarily the most dynamic. She didn't do a whole lot of great roles, but she was memorable. Like, here's the thing. She was a gigantic celebrity still. Like, people were fascinated with her. Like, she had a great publicity campaign around her. And she was looked at as like one of those great promising newcomers, which is actually an award she had won at the Golden Globes. Most promising newcomer. As you know, Hollywood studio assistants were starting to like fall out of favor. Soon Joan Collins would ask for a release from her contract and return to England. This is where she had met Anthony Newley. Yes. And her role would soon transition to being a housewife, honestly. Now, England had a great like boom in the 1960s. Like, people were obsessed with all things Brits. You know, the Beatles, actors like, you know, Michael Caine and the like. Like, they were making these big splashes in Hollywood films. And Anthony Newley would soon cross over and do the same. And Joan Collins, believe it or not, retired. Like, she retired in the 1960s and had kids and raised a family. And it was like this for a while until she had done a movie that her husband, Anthony Newley, had directed and written. Now, what she hadn't known was that her husband had a reputation of being a bit of a stud. And he essentially had written her into the role of, well, the beleaguered housewife. And she soon would realize this is her marriage. She was married to a guy that was cheating on her all the time. And after a while, she was becoming fed up with being at home after the kids started going to school. She wanted a career again. Like, she was bored. So she started doing roles on television. And she did a lot of great TV in the 60s. Like, she was on Batman. She was on one of the most iconic episodes of Star Trek. Like, one of those that's up there is like the greatest episodes ever made. She was on it. And she was doing all sorts of things in her career on television to just keep her name out there, but she wasn't the big celebrity that she once was. She was kind of a has-been, for lack of better words, in the 1960s. It wasn't until she had divorced Anthony Newley and was kind of just like, you know, fishing around with her career, trying to figure out what was next for her. She had started doing horror movies like Tales from the Crypt and, the worst of the worst, Empire of the Ants, where it was her versus giant paper mache ants, and she's going through the Florida swamps. She talks about how she had gotten sick from going through the swamp water and got an infection. Like, it was horrible. She was told there'd be stunt doubles. They never showed up. She had to do all of her own stunts. Like, it was hell doing this picture. And meanwhile, her sister Jackie Collins had become a really prolific author of what people, a polite way of saying smut novels is what they were viewed at that time, like a Jacqueline Suzanne type. They were the type of like books that moms would have and like read, like romantic, lusty novels, the heaving bosom novels. Jackie Collins was writing these, you know, like the Beverly Hills Wives and things like that. And she had recently had a big hit with the novel, The Stud, where one of the roles in it was a very man-hungry woman of a certain age who, you know, attracts the stud and goes on a rompous love affair with him. They were optioning the movie around, and Joan got wind of this and told Jackie, look, I need a role in the most desperate way. What can we do? The Stud would be the movie that would put Joan Collins' career back in high form. It was essentially the very first bitch role she had done. Joan Collins was in her 40s when she did this movie, which is like the death age of a woman in Hollywood when it comes to acting. Like, not a lot of women were getting roles like this. So the fact that she had basically taken a huge risk and being the actress from like the pedigree she had come from, like she was a 20th Century Fox girl. And she was doing this movie now where she's naked getting screwed in an elevator, all right? Like, it was scandalous seeing her like this. Like, she did full-on nude scenes. And there's just like certain things in there that were scandalous and scandalized people. They didn't know how to react to it. And it became this new thing of Joan Collins, the sex symbol. Like, she was viewed as like a sexy, gorgeous woman before, but now it was like thrust upon the public. And she had created a new image for herself that she essentially would never escape in her life, but she learned how to embrace it and how to harness it to be something that could be something she had power over. Before the 80s approached, tragedy would strike Joan Collins' life. Her daughter was sadly struck by a car, and it was a very, 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 very traumatic experience for all involved. She like had a camper set outside the hospital. Like, she was there for her daughter day in and day out. And eventually her daughter would recover, but it wasn't until she was on vacation in Mexico that she had gotten a call from her agent that Aaron Spelling was interested in Joan Collins for a project. And this project was Dynasty. Now, Dynasty honestly was a moment in the 80s. We will get into it, but first things first, I have to tease this wig. I'll be right back.
All right, welcome back. Okay, now we have the hair all teased out.
I started cutting the bangs already, just because it's a little intricate and I want to make sure I got them right. Now let's start cutting this hair and talking about the iconic role of Alexis Carrington and how it became Joan Collins' signature role. Now, Dynasty at this point in the 80s was not doing well. As far as like nighttime soap operas go, Dallas was the show that was beating everyone in the ratings. Like, everyone wanted to be Dallas. And Aaron Spelling wanted desperately to make Dynasty a hit. It starred John Forsythe and Linda Evans. And it's basically just like rich oil money, you know? That's kind of like the whole theme of Dynasty, is just like rich people doing rich people things and just screwing each other over. A storyline would come about with Blake Carrington, patriarch of the Dynasty household, the Carringtons, where his son was gay. And Blake murdered his son's lover. And he's on trial. And Blake's ex-wife, Alexis, comes to speak at the trial. And it was like a cliffhanger of the season. And season 2 should come about, and they're trying to find who should play Alexis Carrington. Like, they couldn't sneeze at this. It had to be a really finely tuned casting. Many women were sourced out and offered this role and turned it down. Elizabeth Taylor was offered it. She turned it down. Sophia Loren turned it down, Raquel Welch turned it down, and eventually they landed on Joan Collins. Now, Joan Collins was looking for work because honestly, her latest marriage had really run her through all of her money. Like her husband had basically ran through all of her money without her knowledge, and she needed to get some fast. So she was approached with this role, and she was just told, it's just like, typical bitch role. You can handle this. It's no different from doing the bitch or the stud. So Joan Collins said, sure, why not? And she signed on to do it. And honestly, she had made little changes to the script that really, really worked in her favor. Like the character, she decided she wasn't going to play American. She wanted to stay British. Even after her manager insisted, like, you should definitely try and play American because they won't understand you. And she said, I have perfect diction. They will understand every word I'm saying. And I'll just become even bitchier when I have this British accent. It's like she's got the perfect voice to play these villain roles. So she comes in season 2 with this sun hat entering the courtroom, and it is television gold. Like television history is made that day, all right? Like the second Joan Collins appeared in that courtroom, it was a cultural reset. And Dynasty would never be the same. Like she took the show's ratings from like the 40s all the way to soaring to #1 and knocking Dallas out of the top spot. Like they're writing articles about how Dallas should be worried because Dynasty has taken over. And the decadence of Dynasty was super influential. Like it was tailor-made for the 80s. It was beautiful costumes, beautiful hair, makeup, rich caviar, real flowers, gorgeous sets, beautiful people. And Joan Collins was in the center of it all. And honestly, just becoming this big, big, big part of the 1980s. It was really groundbreaking because she was in her 50s and she became the biggest celebrity of the 1980s. Like people were obsessed with her. So much so that like the opportunities that came her way were incredible. Like she had her own line of lingerie, her own perfume. Like she was doing it all. And people wanted to look like her, like the shoulder pads, like the gorgeous suits and furs and everything. Like the Alexis Carrington look really, really, really helped shape the way women in business were styling themselves. Like it was this power fantasy. Like it's no wonder she's voted by like AFI to be like one of the greatest villains of television history. Like she truly is. Just how conniving this character was really, really iconic. And also what I liked about the Alexis character is like when they brought her in and she confronted her gay son, of all the people in the show, she was the only one that just accepted him as he was. And like you wouldn't expect that this great villain bitch character. Like his father was horrible and did not accept him, but Alexis was fully just like, yes, this is fine. Like she had no problem with it, which is so groundbreaking for that time. And I love that. Now, the rivalry between Joan Collins and Linda Evans cannot go untalked about. Like Linda Evans played Crystal, who was basically Blake's second wife on Dynasty. And it became basically event television, like, a boxing match when these two would get into their legendary catfights on Dynasty. Like they had one of their first ones in the lily pond, which is like television history in itself. Seeing these beautiful manicured women just like throwing down, tackle each other into a lily pond. It was event television. People didn't know what to think. Like, what is going on over there at Dynasty? One thing that she would do, which would upset John Forsythe on Dynasty, is that in her 50s, Joan Collins famously posed for Playboy, which she did this as a statement to show that like women of a certain age need not be ashamed of their sexuality or their bodies. They can be sexy at any age. And it was a big statement that she wanted to make. And the statement was made. But John Forsythe thought this was disgusting and thought she brought shame to their glamorous show. And she stood up for herself and stood by her decision. And soon would find out that when she would go through contract negotiations, she was making far less than him. And she was honestly the person to thank for this show becoming the huge hit that it was. So she had basically worked herself into a $1 million deal with Dynasty and was one of the highest paid women in television in the 80s. Like, this is power girl moves, okay? Like, come on now. Now, as the 80s would wrap up, Dynasty would soon come to a close, and Joan Collins would return to doing things like the theater in London. She'd start performing on the West End, where there's a lot of talk about, like, could Joan Collins be this great actress? Now she's known for playing, like, these really campy, stereotypical roles. can she actually act? And lo and behold, she could. And even acted alongside her ex-husband, Anthony Newley. Like, she was a big hit on the West End and soon would find herself in yet another battle. She was opening up her career to a bunch of different options. She was approached to write a book, also decided to dabble in fiction, which was her sister Jackie's forte. Joan Collins would write her very first novel, and it was a gigantic hit. So much so that Random House gave her this gigantic deal to basically write 2 books and deliver them at a specific time, which she did. She delivered 2 novels, which were big hits for them, but Random House would soon take her to court and want to basically take back the money they gave her as an advance. So Joan Collins would approach this court battle. The first day there was rocky. Like, she was shaken to her core and did not have a good showing in court. And it looked like she was on the road to losing this. And her friends had told her, like, look, whatever you do, just don't go in there and show that you're intimidated. Just bring Alexis out. Go in there and act like you are Alexis Carrington. And the very next day, she would show up in court, and she had turned into Alexis Carrington and switched it on. Like, she was clever, she was cutting jokes, she had a comeback for everything. She basically just embodied this character that she had played for 9 years. And when it came down to the jury making their decision, they had decided that she had delivered to Random House what they had asked. And she had won the case, which brings us to the Joan Collins of today, who is now Dame Joan Collins. She lives a very private life, married and happy. She only comes out for very special appearances, like she was recently on American Horror Story. She's just a fabulous legend now. All right, now this Alexis hair is just about there, baby. We have the 80s ready to walk through. Okay, this is some power Alexis hair. Now I just gotta clean it up a little bit, and I'll be right back with the final results.
Welcome back. This is the final result. Oh my God, I love it. Yes, she is serving Joan Collins, darling. Oh my God, I feel like such a TV villain in this hair. Like, it's everything. Yes. Oh my gosh, I adore this era of Joan Collins. It's like the hyper glamour, hyper femme Joan Collins, you know, evil diva of the 80s. I live. Oh my gosh. Now, this was so much fun to do. I saw Joan Collins being recommended quite a bit, so I decided let's get her out, especially since from back home in Milwaukee, Divine Trash was asking me to do Joan Collins. After seeing the makeup they wear on Dynasty, she thought, you know what, this needs to be an iconic brunette, and she suggested it, and I did it. And also, when you are playing Joan Collins, you have to have lots of blush on. If you're doing Dynasty, baby, I put on way more blush than I usually do. Now, I would like to take a moment, a Venmo where I thank everyone who's tipped me on Venmo. I would like to thank Sergio again, Ray, Sean, and Sergio one more time. I also have a cash appetizer from Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. As well as YouTube super thanks from Roger, aka Darling Daphne. Thank you so much. Oh my God, I'm thanking you twice right now. You're too much, honey. As well as Simon. Thank you, Simon. As well as Will. Thank you, Will. Thank you all so much for the YouTube super thanks. Oh my gosh. I appreciate the tips so much, you guys. They always go back in this channel to make sure I bring the most quality content to you guys, okay? Like these iconic brunette series, which I'm so glad we're back on doing, okay? We're back on track. Now, if there's an iconic brunette or blonde you want to see, or maybe even a redhead, let me know down below, and I'll take her into consideration and see what we can cook up for the next iconic series. Yes. Now, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, bye. Now hit the outro. Click here and watch the visualizer for my new single, ESTOY PERDIDA. Or watch me talk about my promo look from All Stars 8. Come on, click it. You know you want to. If you don't click it, I won't do another iconic series ever again. So click it.